Dear church, let's talk about politics and faith. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Excited about our guest today. Bobby Ross from the Christian Chronicle is joining us once again. We've had you on at least once, maybe even multiple times, but I always enjoy having you on and you sharing your insight from various stories that you've done. And typically that's what happens is either I respond to a survey you sent out for an article that you're doing, or you and I talk about something and I say, that's a podcast episode and we want to have you on. So that's what's happening here is you recently ran a story in the Christian Chronicle about politics and faith and how ministers are approaching this with their church and kind of what that looks like right now in such a divisive political climate that we have. How does that affect our churches and how our preachers are approaching it? And so that's the topic of the day. And Bobby, I just want to thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, I appreciate it. I think I've been on a couple of times before. So
yes.
I survived those 2 times, so I thought I would come on again.
And it's always good. And one thing that you always say that I want to remind our listeners and viewers is that the Christian Chronicle is you phrase it differently than what I'm going to say. I probably butcher it, but it's not a views paper. It's a newspaper, right? Isn't that how you usually put it?
Right. Yeah, we're trying our best to report on Churches of Christ in a factual manner. And, we do have an editorial page where we will, clearly marked opinions, weigh in on a few things. But, the bulk of what we do, probably 90%, is just trying to report news and quote people and let the readers and the audience decide what they think about it.
Yeah, I know you've received some criticism in the past because, you didn't take this stance or that stance because, that's what's expected, right? We have party lines even within the church. And if you don't land on a party line, we're going to push you towards it and you make us mad if you don't. But that's not your role at the Chronicle.
No, that's not our role. And we try our best to kind of maintain that. I get a little nervous when I get on when I'm talking to you on a podcast like this, what if I slip into personal opinion? Because, we do have personal opinions. We just do our best, with our profession to report fairly and kind of try to put ourselves in the position of various people and reflect kind of where they're coming from as opposed to where we're coming from, if that makes sense.
No, I appreciate that. And I want you to know, I understand the nervousness about that, but that's what we want this podcast to be, is a place where we can be open and honest about some things and share maybe, struggles and opinions and things that we've maybe thought about. And we want there to be a space for that here. And that's why we do the podcast. It's very... Within the church, it's a microcosm of the world right now. So, I talk about having, these party lines that, many in the church expect you to fall on one side or the other. And my opinion is there's a couple of ditches there that we want to stay out of, right? You got the legalistic ditch and the liberal ditch. And I really want to stay out of both of those. But, it's similar to what we see in our culture with politics is you have the party lines. Those lines have been clearly drawn and you've got to land on one or the other. And of course, there's criticism on either side. So talk a little bit about that. Discuss the vitriol and the divide that we see in our country and kind of what's behind it all. And of course, I'm asking you to kind of play off of what you discovered when you were doing this research for your article.
Sure. And some of it's just, I guess, conversations that you have within your own family. Different people in your family have different political views. Different people in your church have different views. Here in the Christian Chronicle office, different people have different views. And I don't know, it seems like we're at a time, kind of the headline of the article that you were referenced was, why are some Christians so angry?
Yes.
And that was actually the question that kind of sparked the survey that we did, was just we kind of asked that question here in the office, why are some Christians so angry, on all sides of the political debate. And I don't know that I know the answer to that. I know we've been through a really traumatic time with the pandemic where we were, all of us, stuck in our homes, wearing masks, weeks, months, even years at a time, kind of some of what we had to do was to just watch TV and kind of, there were 24/7 cable channels that will kind of feed you things that kind of seep into your thinking, and maybe you start thinking that's the only way to approach an issue. Most of us are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and there are things called bots, which, as I understand it, are just not real people pretending to be people. And a lot of those bots are out there on social media just trying to figure out ways where they can get us to believe they're a real person, and then get us to believe the most awful things about other people, or believe the craziest conspiracy theories. And
it's their job
so
to stir the pot, isn't it?
yeah, it's their job to stir the pot, and a lot of us are like buying into it. I mean, and even those of us who are college educated and think we're pretty smart, all of a sudden we're getting all worked up over something, and somebody's like, "You realize that that's a bot, and that didn't actually happen." You just bought into that kind of thing.
Even the news channels, we tend to divide it like Fox News for Republicans and CNN for Democrats. But even if you listen to one of those news channels because they tend to support your platform and your beliefs and things, they still are working off of rankings. Ratings, I should say. If the ratings aren't good, then they lose their show. And so it's their job even to stir you up or to stir the pot to get people riled up, because, and we buy into it hook, line, and sinker. We're hooked. And I think you're right. I think COVID has a lot to do with it. I think people came out of COVID angry. Social media certainly helps to stir that pot. And at some point as Christians, we have to go back to what our true focus is, because Bible says be angry and yet do not sin, but that's the problem. Too many of us sin when we get angry, and we act and react in ways that are completely unbiblical. And I think we're seeing that among Christians, especially as it applies to the political process.
No, I think you're right. I think another term that I've heard. I was at a church that we did a story at the same time we did this other story where we interviewed a lot of ministers, or surveyed a lot of ministers about politics. It was a church in Marysville, Ohio, which has been there 100 years, and about, I think it's a couple hundred members, 200 or 300 members. I'm losing. I can't remember the exact membership, but they had a lot of things happen during the pandemic, and they had people leave because of how they handled COVID. Some people didn't like that they went to church on Zoom, and then we had, in the middle of all that, we had the controversy over the police and George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, and the minister did a video with some black ministers about kind of the racial reconciliation, and some people didn't like that for whatever reason. But actually, a couple of the members that I interviewed at that church used the term political idolatry.
Yes.
And it's almost like some Christians, we've made politics an idol, and we've made certain political positions an idol. On one side, it might be you have to be against abortion and vote for every politician who does what we want to do on abortion. On the other side, it might be Christians saying, God is a God of justice. You have to vote for candidates who believe that Black Lives Matter and that kind of thing. And it's to the point where, for certain Christians, and those are just two examples of a lot of issues, but for certain Christians, you have to choose a certain political side and a certain political party, or you can't even be a Christian. So there's no room for Christians to have different positions, because it's almost like I've made this political position, this political party is now my idol, and to be a Christian in good standing, you have to go with the elephant, or you have to go with the donkey, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we push Jesus, we push God into whatever political party that we believe supports us. And so we make Jesus a Republican or a Democrat. And of course, right, that even furthers the divide. We feel like, we conjure up a God or a Messiah that supports what we support. And when I've always said, personally, this is one of those personal opinions. I believe in being involved in the political process. I just don't believe in turning involvement into idolatry, because at the end of the day, whoever's in the White House makes no difference when Jesus is on the throne, right? And so I think that while it is good, important, even in my opinion, to be involved in the political process, when it morphs into idolatry is when we have an issue. And I see that. I don't know if you did as well doing this article, but I see that in a lot of our churches, among a lot of Christians, is that it has become an idol, and therefore it's causing people to act and react in ways that are completely non-Christian. So what have you noticed when you interviewed these different, when you surveyed these different ministers and stuff, what did you notice among them that they were doing to navigate these kind of turbulent waters? How were they approaching it in their respective churches?
Yeah, I got a variety, and I had written down some notes so I would remember some of this, but some of them are going as far as saying maybe David Lipscomb had it right when he said he wasn't going to get involved in civil government, and he was going to, leave the city of man to itself, and he was going to stick it to the city of God. And so some, I think, are just, it's just, let's get out of the realm of politics and let's focus entirely on kingdom matters. There's some that rather than tackle current events from the pulpit are making more of an effort to just preach the Bible, because I think there's some tendency, and you as a preacher would know this better than me, but if there's a big decision on Roe v. Wade, do I have to preach Sunday on how the church should respond to the Roe v. Wade being knocked down? Do I have to preach on Sunday on racial strife in the country? And I think some of the ministers are feeling like there's an old saying that a preacher needs to have a newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other. They're kind of like, let's not read the newspaper maybe so much, and let's just focus on the Bible, because it is so divisive. Because you got people in most churches, people on both sides of things, looking to see, one's going to be happy with you, one's going to be maybe disappointed,
no doubt,
in what you say. And then I think a common theme of what a lot of people said was just striving hard to preach about, what you said earlier about Jesus being on the throne, and about let's focus on the lamb and not the donkey or the elephant, and just trying to approach biblical issues from the pulpit, or biblical issues from a biblical standpoint, in God's will, regardless of where that might take you from a political standpoint. And I guess that approach is more, let's read the Bible and see what God says, instead of let's decide what our politics is and then let's find a Bible verse to back it up, that kind of thing.
Oh, I totally agree. I know that, my response in that article, or response is, had to do with that, is keeping the focus where it should be, which is on Jesus and the gospel. Jesus, the first church both operated in hostile governments that were hostile towards them. And, the church was still thriving. The church still was making a difference. We don't need the government in order to be successful as the church or as disciples. I think sometimes we believe that, and certainly we would appreciate that and we would like that, right? But we don't have to have the government on our side in order to be successful, because, Jesus is on the throne. God is our king. But I also, that's kind of been my approach, is to be biblical in nature, be focused on that, because issues like abortion, those are biblical topics. They're not political issues. They become political issues, but first and foremost, that's a biblical topic. And so, we can approach it from that standpoint easily, right? But I do feel like that some folks, like you just said, start from the political realm and then let that affect their faith, when it should be absolutely the other way around. Your faith should drive everything in your life. It should saturate everything you are, everything you believe. So when your alignment with Him, the head, then it saturates everything else, right?
Yeah, right.
Talk about how we can stand for the right thing in the wrong ways. You know what I mean? I think that happens all too often, that, we have good morals, we have good values, we have good politics in our mind, but we stand for things that are right in the wrong way.
Yeah, I think, we mentioned abortion. I think it's possible for a pro-life Christian to go about that in the wrong way, and almost a way that would make people who aren't members of the church, who aren't Christians, think that maybe Christians hate pregnant women, or Christians, all Christians are concerned about is getting this baby out, and that they're not concerned about,
Right.
about taking care of baby, or supporting women who may be in a pregnancy or a situation where they don't feel like they can afford a baby. What other examples?
Yeah, from womb to tomb, right?
From womb to tomb,
Yeah.
exactly. I think Christians are, there's a lot of times news reports refer to Christians as anti-gay instead of pro biblical marriage. As Christians, as members of churches of Christ, most believe in marriage between one man and one woman, and I think it's possible for Christians who believe something to believe it in such a way that it comes across as Christians hate gay people, Christians hate transgender people. There's just, and those are the abortion, the same-sex issue. Those are just two off the top of my head. But I think it's a matter of, from my perspective, God is love, and Jesus never. I don't think he approached people who were living in sin or who had sinned in hateful ways. He approached them in loving ways, and so I think there are some cases and some issues where Christians could do a better job of that. I think it's, there's some. It seems like the Bible, the New Testament, talks about Christians and persecutions and how the world will not understand some of the things you believe, and the world will mistreat you. And it's almost like we as Christians, sometimes we're surprised that people respond to us the way we do, and so the way they do, and we respond in kind and instead of responding in love. And
Right.
I've rambled a little bit, but I think maybe that answers your question.
It does, and I think it's highly important. I think it's the most important. I mean, Jesus said it was, love God with all of your being and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we forget that sometimes. And look, nobody's mind is changed through these gotcha memes or posts on Facebook or Instagram, right? We feel like we won the argument because we had this meme that kind of explained it perfectly, our position on homosexuality or abortion or whatever the issue of the day is. And reality is that somebody outside of Christ is, and maybe even other Christians are looking at that and going, really? I mean, but do you care? That's the thing. Do you have compassion? And where's the love in that, right? And that's one thing that I talk to our folks about quite a bit is, let's keep the focus where it needs to be on Jesus, love for the lost, a love for our fellow man, and stop it with these trying to win an argument rather than trying to win a soul. And I've even said we need to turn off Fox News, turn off CNN, turn off the TV, and because meanwhile, the lost are still lost. We need to be out there and we need to be doing what our number one responsibility is, which is trying to reach them. And we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're really, really undoing our efforts when we put these things on Facebook, social media, and we just buy into all of that rhetoric and the toxicity. What else in your findings and talking with other ministers and surveying other ministers have you found that works in navigating these difficult, divisive times? Anything specific that stands out to you that the guys talked about that said, that they felt like it worked,
I think just a lot of what we've talked about, just kind of emphasizing the kingdom side of things as opposed to the earthly political side of thing, and just trying to, I mean, you talked about turning off the TV and maybe turning off social media in the interview you did. Maybe you talked about just, how divisive that is. And I think one positive thing is when Christians just have an open mind and sit down and talk to each other. It's amazing how, one funny thing is on Facebook, sometimes you'll see friends of friends just going at it on some political issue or even some doctrinal issue, and they've never met each other. So I think the more opportunities we have to just get real people like me and you just talking to each other
Yeah.
face to face is helpful. And I think we lose ourselves sometimes in the social media and the memes and the cable TV, and just it's like technology has really done some great things, like allowing a conversation like this to happen from 300 miles away from each other. But
Yeah.
then there's seems like there's been a lot of negative things happen too, that we could maybe solve some of it if we were just willing to sit down and talk to each other with an open mind.
That's a good point. It seems like we always want to elevate the conversation to 10 instead of, I saw a conversation between Bill Maher, who's definitely atheist, definitely on the liberal side of politics, with Ben Shapiro, who's definitely on the conservative side, a Jewish man. And they're having this conversation. Then during the conversation, Bill Maher says, this is what's needed, is we just don't do this. And, we don't just sit down and talk. And I have Christian friends who say, well, I just don't understand how this Christian friend of mine over here believes the way he does. I just don't understand how he, as a Christian, he can believe that. And I'm like, really? Because you haven't sat down with him, maybe? Because you haven't had conversation and discourse that is rooted in love and understanding and trying to be intentional in all those things. Maybe that's the reason, right? And you said that a moment ago about how some of the ministers are kind of taking David Lipscomb's approach, which is just to stay out of politics completely. And I can see how somebody can get to that point, right? You look at all the rhetoric and all the junk that's going on, you see how they get there. And, we've talked about that before, and it actually raised the ire of some of our people when I said, you don't have to vote. You don't have to be involved in the political process. That's not sinful. Nowhere in the Bible will you find that is sinful. And that really irks some people. And of course, based on some of the reaction, you sit there and go, well, you proved my point about it being an idol, right? The response by people shows you what they worship sometimes, but you don't have to be involved in it. And I've had friends tell me, well, if you don't vote, you're just, that's a vote for the Democrat, right? If you don't vote, then that just gives it. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me how that works mathematically. There's 50 million people that vote for this candidate and 50 million people that vote for this one, and I choose not to vote. How does that give them a vote, right? But we come up with all sorts of ways to justify our position when at the end of the day, I think the best thing is to allow our faith to drive us, to motivate us, and saturate every area of our lives, including our politics, and try to approach it from that standpoint. I mean, wouldn't you say?
No, I think that sounds like a great approach. I'll stress once again, I'm a journalist, not a theologian or minister. So I mean, for my opinion, that's my opinion for what it's worth.
I keep putting you on the spot with that, right? But you've made it clear, and I'm not listening, that you are a journalist. Before I let you get off of here, Bobby, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but what has been the most eye-opening story you've done as a journalist? Maybe not even just for Christian Chronicle, because I know you've worked in other areas. What has been the most interesting or eye-opening or shocking story that you have covered in your time? How many years have you been doing this now?
I have been full-time journalism 32 years, 32 and a half years.
Yeah, so
it's going fast.
Some stories have to stick out to you, right? What are some of those? What's one of those?
This is probably not what you're asking, but as far as crazy stories that I've done in my lifetime, there was when I was working for AP in Dallas. There was a like a rock. I think he was like a singer or a drummer for this big rock band. I think his name was Dimebag or something in reference to a dime bag of marijuana. But I got this Church of Christ Bobby got sent to cover his funeral, and it's like, you had people like Eddie Van Halen and others, and paying
Wow.
tributes to this guy, and every other word was the F word. And so I'm interviewing people and trying to write a story and trying to do quotes that can actually go on the AP wire. So that's probably not what you're asking, but that was a crazy story to just go cover something like that. Even in a circumstance like that, you have one perception of people before you get there, but then you start talking to people and fans who are mourning this guy, and you see that these people may have a different language than I speak, and but they are, there's a reason this guy resonated with them, and this is their life experience and where they're coming from. And so in a weird way, maybe that's another example of, you don't really know about people until you actually have the chance to talk to them. And even in that case, I felt like I had gained a little bit of insight into that musician and the people who were fans of his.
That's leading with grace, right? And I feel like that's where we're so lacking. I think probably perhaps the biggest problem in our culture right now is a lack of grace. And we should be the leaders in that as Christians, right? I mean, we should be on the forefront, leading the charge to be people with grace, giving people a front row seat to the grace of God. And we undo God's work and God's mission when we're out there, trying to win an argument and fighting and clawing and being silly when it comes to something like politics or any topic, and dismissing grace in the process.
No, it would be great if we could figure out a way, and I'm not sure I have the answer. Figure out a way where we could disagree with people, be it on politics or anything else, yet them still go away from that conversation or that interaction saying, I respect that person. That's a loving person. I would enjoy another conversation with that person, instead of thinking, that person is, they're so hard-headed, they're so closed-minded. If I don't ever have to cross paths with them again in my life, it will be perfect for me. It would be.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not claiming to have the answer, because honestly, in the last few months, I've had political conversations go awry with my parents, with people here in the office. It's easy to sit here and talk on a screen like this, where I know you're going to put it on the internet and put it online. But, when you're dealing with people you're close to, or, people where you have differences of opinion, it can be a hard thing. It's easy to talk about, but, to live it out, it's much harder.
It really is. I think the bottom line in all this is politics is not most important. We need to stop acting like it is. It may be important, it's not most important, and it's certainly not worth losing our Christianity over or acting in ways that causes others to not want to be attracted to God. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us, buddy. I always appreciate your insight, your writings. Tell people how to keep up with you, the Christian Chronicle, all that, okay?
You can read the Christian Chronicle online at christianchronicle.org. We have a monthly print edition that we mail out. We have about 135,000 subscribers. If you're watching this and you're not on that mailing list, send me your email, send me your mailing address, your home congregation, and we'll get you on our list to get a complimentary subscription and see what you think about that. And just email me at Bobby, BOBBY, at christianchronicle.org.
Yeah, that's great. And it's worth it. I appreciate so much the work that the Christian Chronicle is doing, what you're doing there and your staff as well. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you all for tuning in. If you have a question about today's episode or any episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. We appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.